Hey everybody, it's Kristen, and I'm back. It's kind of a late night episode here, and I'm back to talk more about the end of the world, possibly. And we're going to get Dr. David Jeremiah's take on some of the current or not so current events, because his book that we're talking about was written in 2008, so it's not really that current anymore. But, he believes current events are evidence of Bible prophecy beginning to unfold right in front of our eyes. And so, chapter 2 of his book is titled The Crude Awakening. The Crude Awakening. And I gave a clue in my last video. It was the Beverly Hillbillies. That's what the clue was for this chapter. What is he going to be talking about in chapter 2? Oil. Yes, some of you guessed it, oil. So Dr. David Jeremiah, whom my grandma loves dearly, and she gave me this book, he's going to lay out his case that oil is one of the major factors in biblical prophecy. And so remember, in our last video, we talked about the nation of Israel. Of course, David Jeremiah thinks that the fact that the nation of Israel became a nation in 1948 is a huge sign of prophecy being fulfilled. Remember, there's just this one little pesky problem that keeps popping up, and that is that Jesus said all the signs that he gave would be fulfilled in the generation that was standing in front of him 2,000 years ago. So far, Dr. Jeremiah hasn't given an explanation for that verse, but I don't know, maybe he will later in the book. But today we're going to talk about oil. So, okay, Dr. Jeremiah points out a few really scary things here. Oil prices have quintupled in the last 6 years. That was in 2008, of course. As I write this, he says, surplus oil production has doubled over recent years and demand is somewhat reduced, but unsettling record highs have been registered so far this year in all gasoline products, home heating fuels, automobile fuel, diesel fuel, etc., etc. So he's going to make a case that we're running out of oil, or at least in 2008, we were running out of oil. And he believes, now this is going to be a quote from Dr. Jeremiah. He says, oil is the new gold in the world economy, and more than any factor other than the nation of Israel, which we talked about in our last video, oil holds the key to the prophetic events of the future. Okay, because remember, this is what in the world is going on. And he said he's going to give us 10 keys or clues or signs that will tell us how to explain biblical prophecy. So through current events. Here's what he's going to say. Oil explains why the Bible focuses its end time attention on the Middle East. Okay, so he says oil holds the key to the prophetic events of the future. Doesn't give a scripture reference for that, but he just states it. And oil explains why the Bible focuses its end time attention on the Middle East. And then I put in the notes there, like reference, question mark, okay, do you have any scripture to back that up? I know the Bible talks a lot about oil. David said, you anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. I don't really feel like he was talking about crude oil, Don't think he was talking about gasoline products, but okay, maybe David Jeremiah thinks that. I wrote in the little margin there, I wrote that the Bible focuses on the Middle East because that is where Jerusalem is located, and that is where Jesus lived, spent a lot of his time in Jerusalem, and it's where he died, and it's where the temple to God was located, and the priests conducted their worship services. So I feel like maybe that's why the Bible focuses on the Middle East, not so much oil. I was thinking about this, and I've mentioned before that I was lucky enough. My brother took me on a trip to Israel several years ago before he was married, and he didn't have anyone to go with him, so I got to go. And they eat a lot of chickpeas in the Middle East. We called it awful falafel, a lot of falafel. So you could almost replace oil with chickpeas, I feel like, and you could say chickpeas explains why the Bible focuses its end time attention on the Middle East. I mean, just because there's a lot of oil in the Middle East does not mean that that Bible prophecy is focused on oil. But that's what he says, so okay. What does it tell us about coming events? Well, he says, in Luke's gospel, Jesus contrasts our ability to discern weather signs with our inability to understand the more important signs of the time. This is from Luke 12:56. You can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it that you do not discern this time? Surely the world's fascination with oil, a hot commodity, with a source in lands hostile or borderline hostile to Israel and to us, qualifies as a sign. So, Jesus was saying, how are you not recognizing the signs? And obviously, Jesus was talking to us because Israel lives in a land surrounded by a lot of countries that have oil who are hostile to Israel. So, therefore, we know that Jesus was talking about oil and our day and our time. I don't know. Does that seem like a stretch to you? Remember, it's funny that he quotes this verse because it says, you can discern the face of the sky. So remember, Jesus is not talking to you. He's not talking to Kristen. He was talking to actual people that were standing there in front of him 2,000 years ago. And he says, you can discern the face of the sky, but how is it that you do not discern this time? This time, the time that he was living in approximately 2,000 years ago. He didn't say, how is it that you cannot discern these future events that are going to happen 2,000 years in the future? Wouldn't that be kind of silly anyway? Why would Jesus expect them to discern, to understand that these are signs or were signs of something that was going to happen 2,000 years in the future? No. I think, or maybe, can we just admit that it's possible? Is it possible that maybe Jesus was talking to them about events and signs that they would see in their day? Just something to think about. Okay. Then he's going to show us a map with Israel surrounded by all the hostile nations. And there's a chart that shows all the countries that produce oil. And turns out the U.S. doesn't even make it onto the chart as far as how much oil we produce. We don't produce much oil, but we use a lot of oil. So he says, okay, let's see. I think he says the U.S. is the number one user of oil, but the number 11th, I think, producer of oil. So Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil supplier. And according to the agreement that was made, the United States would back the Saudi government as an ally if the Saudis would demand that all purchases of its oil be in US dollars. This would ensure the primacy of the dollar in the world economy. See how everything kind of becomes about the US, the United States of America? Got to keep the dollar number one, guys. It's part of biblical prophecy. The net effect of this agreement was that the US dollar was, in effect, backed by oil instead of gold. And I wrote in my margin, so what? So what? I mean, what in the world does this have to do with Bible prophecy? I don't know. He doesn't really explain it. He just tells us that it's so, okay? Okay. here we go. Russia is, okay, consumers of the world's oil supply. So who's consuming all the world's oil? Any guesses? He's going to give you the top 4. Let's see if you can guess who's number 4. Russia. Followed by Japan, followed by, or I'm sorry, it'd be like Russia number 4, Japan number 3, number 2, China, number 1, I already told you, the US. Okay, so we rank first in consumption. This was in 2008. I don't know how much oil China's consuming now. Maybe they've gone up, I'm not sure. But then he goes on to say the United States is number 10 in oil reserves. So we don't have many reserves. And he says it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that a crisis is looming in our future. Remember, this was written in 2008, but the crisis was looming right over our heads. Okay. I'm going to skip over that part. Okay, now he's going to talk about conflicts over the world's oil supply. So there have been wars over oil. That is true. He's going to go and talk about different wars that have been fought over oil. But what does that have to do with Bible prophecy? I don't know. He doesn't give us any verses to show us that it has anything to do with Bible prophecy. But then he quotes this thing called the Carter Doctrine. Okay, so the Carter Doctrine. It says this, I don't know, I just found this interesting. I don't know if this might be a little off topic, and hopefully this doesn't make you mad. But it says in the Carter Doctrine, let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. So when I read that, I mean, I'm pretty much a pretty skeptical person now, but I was thinking, what is he saying there? What is the Carter Doctrine saying? It's saying we want the oil that's in the Persian Gulf region. And if anyone else tries to take control of the oil, we will use our great, big, giant military complex to make sure that no one else can have control of the oil. And I don't know about you, but I just don't know that makes us like morally wonderful people, as a nation. I mean, is that a good thing to say we want this oil and we're going to have it, and if you won't give it to us, we're going to send in our military? They made me think about Saddam Hussein in the Persian Gulf. And I know we were told that the United States went over into Kuwait and got rid of Saddam Hussein because we needed to help people have freedom and democracy. And I'm sure that it really wasn't that we just wanted to control the oil. But it is kind of funny that this Carter Doctrine seems to say blatantly, obviously, that we will just do anything to control the oil. I don't know. Am I being ridiculous? Is that a stretch? I don't know. Then he goes on. So, obviously there's wars. And I don't know why it always has to be about the United States. Why is he quoting this Carter Doctrine? And why is the whole book about how the United States is going to run out of oil? I mean, there's a lot of other countries in the world besides the United States. I'm just not sure why and I'm from the United States, but why would I think that we are the only nation that God should care about, that we have this divine right to have all the world's oil, and that we should never want for oil, and all the other countries can just do without? I mean, that doesn't That just doesn't seem right to me. So this idea, this whole dispensational idea, I feel has this level of American arrogance to it. And as Christians, I feel like we're supposed to look at each other more unified in brotherly love, being this body of Christ. It has nothing to do with, race or country. We have a heavenly country. So I don't know why he's always focused on the US politics, I guess, is what I'm saying. But okay, the next section of his book is titled Concerns About the World's Oil Supply. And I wrote in that margin, oh no, fear, because he's going to tell us that we're running out of oil. He says in Oklahoma, the reserves are at their lowest levels ever. Apparently, they have big tankers for oil reserves. They're at their lowest level ever. That was in 2008. So I don't know. I don't know if they're low now or not, but I went to the gas station yesterday and I filled up my car with gas. So they haven't run out yet. Here's another thing he says. In 2005, the world used more oil than even was produced in the year following. And then he says, and there is one energy rule that even I can understand. Energy use cannot exceed available energy. So basically he's saying, we are using more oil than the world produces, so we're gonna run out of oil. Okay. In 2008, he said that. And then I wrote in the margin, I had just watched this documentary about marketing and how they get people to buy really expensive luxury products. And I'm sorry if you like to buy really expensive luxury products, because this might sound like I'm making fun of you. I'm not, or maybe I am, but it was about Louis Vuitton and Gucci, I think, and maybe there were some others. I didn't watch the whole thing, but basically, there's nothing really special about those bags. It's not like the material is that much better or the quality. It's not. I think at one bag it cost them $65 to make it, and they were selling it for $600 or $700. But people were lining up to get these, and the way they do it is they create a shortage. A lot of times you would go in to get the bag that you wanted or the wallet or the whatever, and they don't have it. It's sold out. So it's this limited supply, and then they have very high level marketing. And so they create this desire within people that this is the in thing. This is what all the cool people have. And if you're anybody, then you're going to have this thing. And then you go to get it and you can't get it because it's sold out. And it just creates this desire in you to have it. And they can basically charge whatever they want because they've done such a great job. And anyway, my point with that story was, this whole idea of oil shortages. How do we really know how much oil we have? I mean, I feel like we're just trusting what they tell us, what we see on TV, what we read in the newspaper, if anybody still reads the newspaper anymore. But yeah, who's out there counting all the gallons of oil, and how do you know that each country is accurately telling you how much oil they have, and how do we know that they aren't going to find more oil? And I don't know. We're really kind of taking their word for it. And part of me wonders if they create shortages intentionally just to jack up the price. I don't know. Yet again, I'm probably just being cynical. So, okay. Then he, okay. He says, our ability to protect our foreign oil inflow is limited at best. So he makes this whole case about how we have to get oil from these foreign Middle Eastern nations. And our ability to protect our foreign oil inflow is limited at best, even if we commit to using brute military force, like the Carter Doctrine. We cannot ensure an endless supply of oil from hostile countries. And then I wrote, so be afraid, because we might run out of oil, or we might not be able to get oil. So we should all be sitting around living in fear since 2008. Okay, is there any oil in Israel? That's the next section of his book. So he's going to go on and talk a lot about how they are going to find oil in Israel because, for example, in Ezekiel, it speaks of a time when God would do better for Israel than at her beginnings. So because in Ezekiel 36, it says God will do better for Israel than at her beginnings, that means that they're going to find oil in Israel soon. Okay? He says, it was going to be even more prosperous than in the days of King Solomon. God is telling Israel that at some time in the future to us, he says, Israel will be wealthier than it ever was. And okay, I thought about that and I couldn't help but going back to the New Testament, which I know we're not supposed to do. David Jeremiah does not like to quote from the New Testament, at least so far. But going to the New Testament and thinking about the words of Jesus, I kept thinking, how Jesus said, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break in and steal. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth. But here we have David Jeremiah telling us that God has promised Israel this great monetary wealth, which will be in the form of oil. But remember, the verse goes on to say, but rather store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt and thieves do not break in and steal, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be. Okay? So I'm not really sure that when God promised that he was going to make Israel wealthier than she ever was, I'm not sure that we have to assume that he meant physical wealth by that he meant gold and silver and oil. Maybe he had in mind things that do not corrupt. Maybe he was talking about heavenly wealth and heavenly riches, which last. I don't know, just a thought. And then David Jeremiah wants to talk about, okay, I'm sorry. He believes that when Israel does find oil, that will solve all her problems because, well, first of all, I guess I didn't know that Israel had a lot of financial problems, but apparently according to him, Israel must need some cash. So they need to find oil to solve their economic woes. And once they get it, they can use the money to resettle the Palestinians. So they're going to get oil, they're going to sell the oil for billions and billions of dollars, and then they're going to use that money to tell the Palestinians, some of whom are Christians, by the way. Remember that. I mean, it's another piece of the puzzle here is that we have atheist Jews wanting to dislocate Christian Palestinians in some cases. I'm not saying all Palestinians are Christians by any means, but I do think it's interesting that some of them are. But so if we just pay the Palestinians off, I'm sure they'll just, leave their homes and their land and take their cash and run, because I'm sure it's all about money for them. Actually, it's kind of funny, when we were there, we entered a Palestinian area and we had to get a different guide because they didn't allow Jews into this area. So the Jewish tour guide got off, the Palestinian tour guide got on the bus, and of course he's giving us a whole different story than our Jewish tour guide had given. And he said that the Palestinians remember when the land was taken from them and when they were forced out of their homes in 1948, and that they still have the keys to their houses, and they will go onto the hills surrounding wherever the Jews are, and they will, on certain days, they shake the keys. They shake the keys to their houses and they say, "We still have the keys." And let me tell you, they're pretty bitter about it. I don't think that money is going to solve the problem for them. I think that they want justice, and I don't think they're going to be bought off. But anyway, okay. Then he goes on to say some really interesting things, more about oil being found in Israel. He says, if you look at a map of the territory allotted to the 12 tribes, you'll see that Asher's area resembles a giant foot. And then he quotes a verse saying that Asher will dip his foot in oil. And so he believes that they're going to find oil there in the toe of Asher's foot in Israel. Okay. Now, this is the part I really wanted to talk about. We're going to try to, I really wanted to keep it under 30 minutes, but there's so much here. How does the oil situation affect our future? Well, basically, we should all be living in fear. But he says, Ezekiel foretold a time when Russia would attack Israel. Now, I'm assuming he's talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39 here, where it talks about Rush, or I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. You can go read it, but people have said, oh, okay, Rush, it must mean Russia. But actually, it just means chief prince, not prince of Russia. It just means chief prince. It means the head, right? Rush means head or chief, and it's used 600 times in the Old Testament. It's not talking about Russia here. It just means chief. And so he's going to say this is about Russia when there's no evidence of that. And he's quoting Ezekiel 38, and it says, I will turn you around. I will put hooks into your jaws and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. And he goes on to say that this is going to be part of this end time alliance with Russia, and they're going to attack Israel and blah, 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 blah. But Gary DeMar, if you have time, look up Gary DeMar. I Googled Gary DeMar Gog and Magog because, what David Jeremiah is saying is that these prophecies are talking about events of today, and it mentions Gog and Magog, this battle that's found in Revelation, and, these things are relating to this oil crisis. Same thing that Max Lucado and Glenn Beck have been saying. In fact, they said on a show together that all the players are in place for this battle of Gog and Magog. All the players are in place. It's going to happen now. But Gary DeMar it's like only a 15-minute talk that he does on this subject. And he points out a few really, I think, fascinating things that I never would have known or thought of. But he points out that, first of all, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, which, Dr. Jeremiah is saying is in our future, if you look at that, the enemies in that passage want the spoil. They want gold, silver, cattle, and goods, okay? But if you think about Israel, when they came out of Babylon in the book of Esther, they brought with them gold, silver, cattle, and goods. So Gary DeMar's point is going to be that this battle that all these prophecy pundits are placing in our future actually is in our past, like way in our past, and it reached its fulfillment in the time of Esther. In the book of Esther, we can see this battle that happened. Remember Haman? his name was Haman Gog. He's referred to as Haman Gog in the Bible. And this battle was taking place under the reign of Xerxes with Esther and Haman. And he points out that they were living in unwalled villages, which cannot happen now because Jerusalem and all these places in Israel are living in walled cities. There's a wall all the way around Jerusalem now. But this battle that is mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39 takes place in a place of unwalled villages, which is exactly how Israel was when they came out of Babylon. So the Medes and the Persians destroy Babylon. Cyrus sends the Jews back, some of them back to Israel that want to come back. Some are left in what was formerly Babylon. And now the Jews are living in unwalled villages. The goods that they had were the same as what the enemies wanted. Haman, you know what Haman wanted in the book of Esther? He wanted to be paid in silver, just like it says in Ezekiel. Also, the battle that's described, they use chariots. They're on horseback. There's horses, and they use swords, and arrows, bucklers, and shields. These are ancient battle weapons. He's not describing, I'm sorry, I know my 5th grade teacher told me, oh, well, he's describing the Apache helicopters. No, he's not describing Apache helicopters. It wouldn't make any sense to give this prophecy to people 2,500 or more years ago and be describing Apache helicopters and calling it a battle with chariots on horseback, with bucklers and shields, etc., helmets. Okay? So this is describing an ancient battle, and this battle actually happened and took place in approximately, I guess it would be like 400 BC. I don't know. The Israelites came out of Babylon in 536-ish BC, I think. So sometime after that. But Gary DeMar says, this is a quote from him, the entire prophetic scenario is based on passages that have already been fulfilled. So he's basing his entire prophetic scenario on passages that have already been fulfilled. Now, is there some typology in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that applies to this coming of the new covenant that happened in 70 AD? This judgment on Babylon, which I'm going to say is the nation of Israel, these people that were keeping the captives, refusing to let the captives go, i.e. the Jews refusing to let the Christians leave this old covenant system and enter into the new covenant. There's so much typology there. The whole book of Esther is just, we should do a study on that sometime. But anyway, the Ezekiel 38 and 39, important to know that it was fulfilled, just as it was predicted. It was fulfilled in the Old Testament. You can read about it in the books of Ezra and Esther. So, okay. He says this end time alliance with Russia and Iranian scientists, he says Iranian nuclear scientists are being trained in Russia. And that is the end time alliance that was predicted 2,500 years ago. And he gets all of that from the word Rush in Ezekiel, which means head or chief and does not mean Russia. And it's used 600 times in the Old Testament. It seems like a stretch. I don't know. Okay. Also, keep this in mind. This was another point from Gary DeMar that really, until today, I had never even thought about this before. He said, the prophecies of returning to the land and the temple being rebuilt aren't found in the New Testament. They're found in the Old Testament. and they were fulfilled in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, you will not find one single mention of the temple being rebuilt. Isn't that interesting? We have this idea in our head right now, at least if you were raised in the culture that I was raised in, that the Bible predicts, that the New Testament predicts that the temple is going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. But the New Testament never says anything about a temple being rebuilt. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, when the New Testament talks about the temple being built, it's always a spiritual temple, and Jesus is the cornerstone, and we are being built up like living stones. That's the temple that's being built in the New Testament. There's never a rebuilt physical temple prophesied in the New Testament. But it was prophesied in the Old Testament. Remember, their temple was destroyed by Babylon, and it was prophesied that it would be rebuilt. And it was in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay? Same thing with coming to the land. They were removed, expelled from the land when Babylon conquered them and destroyed their temple, and he took the exiles away out of Israel. And there was a prophecy that they would be restored to their land, and they were. So, already been fulfilled. We don't have to be waiting for these things to happen again. Okay? They were already been physically fulfilled. When they happen again in the New Testament, it's always spiritually. Remember, what is seen is temporary, what is unseen is eternal. The temple that's being built in the New Testament is of living stones. And the sacrifices that are offered in this temple are not of blood, the blood of goats and lambs, but it was Christ's sacrifice once and for all. Okay, so he goes on to say, oh, things do not bode well for the United States. Because again, it's all about the United States. And I wrote, fear. Remember, this was 2008, but things were not boding well. And then, what are we to do? Okay, that's right here. What are we to do? Okay. He says we should be waiting with patient anticipation for what will soon be rewarded. We will soon be rewarded. Soon, like, 2,000 years soon or more, or 10, maybe 10,000 years, maybe a million years, but soon. He says, keep on waiting. When the fig tree puts forth leaves, you can tell that the Son of Man is returning by recognizing the signs given by the prophets. He says, Jesus told them that you can tell that summer is near when the fig tree puts forth leaves. Okay, so we know that the Son of Man is returning by recognizing the signs, like all the signs about oil. And then he quotes, or he mentions Matthew 24:32, which is the verse that says, you can tell that summer's near when the fig tree puts forth leaves. And I wrote so close because he's only 2 verses away from Matthew 24:34, which says, all these things will take place in this generation. He said, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place 2,000 years ago. And then he says, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do to hasten it, so we just have to be patient, even though Jesus said it was going to happen 2,000 years ago. Then he says, keep working. Okay, I agree with that. We shouldn't be sitting around waiting for something that I think already happened, but I mean, even if he thinks it's in the future, I guess he says we should keep working. And he says that, there's the imminent return of Jesus. I think I addressed this in an older video, this whole idea of imminence. I asked my pastor once what he means by the imminent return of Jesus, and he said it's imminent, and imminent means it's sure to happen. That's not what imminent means. I didn't say this to him because I didn't want to make him feel bad, but imminent does not mean sure to happen. You could look it up if you want, but I'll tell you, it means it's going to happen soon. Oh, soon, 2,000 years ago. But he says we should, okay, so he says, someone once asked him, what would you like to be doing when Jesus comes back? Okay, his response totally confuses me, and I need help understanding it. So help me out in the comments because I'm so confused. So what does David Jeremiah want to be doing when the Lord returns? You know what he said? When the Lord returns, I would like to be standing behind my pulpit before my flock, declaring and explaining and applying the word of God. For me, there's nothing better. Okay. What I was thinking was, because Dr. Jeremiah believes that first he would be raptured off the earth. So when Jesus returns, then he wouldn't be on the earth. So how would he be standing at his pulpit preaching? Because he says right there, what do you want to be doing when he returns? And then he talks about the trumpet sound and the archangel and the twinkling of an eye. We are changed and rise to meet him in the clouds. Isn't that what people think the rapture is? Wait, the trumpet and the twinkling of an eye, I thought that was the rapture. But he calls it Christ's return. So what I'm asking is the rapture Christ's second coming? Because here he says he wants to be preaching when Christ returns. Isn't his return his second coming? And wouldn't he be gone at his second coming? But then he quotes trumpet sounds, or he talks about trumpet sounds, the archangel, twinkling of an eye, and change to rise to meet him in the clouds, which to me sounds like 1 Thessalonians 4, which I thought was like a rapture passage. So I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on there. You guys can help me out. But okay, the last thing we need to do, according to David Jeremiah, is keep on watching. I mean, they've been watching, we've been watching for 2,000 years. We need to keep on watching. And he quotes Paul saying in Romans 13:11, stay awake out of their sleep, for their salvation was nearer than when they first believed. He says, your salvation is nearer than when you first believed. That's what Paul told the Romans. So how does that work? If their salvation was nearer than when they first believed, but they were just going to die, and Jesus still hasn't returned 2,000 years later, how is their salvation really nearer? I mean, what does it matter if something's nearer to you if it's not going to happen for thousands of years after you die? It seems nonsensical to say that, but okay. And then, okay, so he's telling us we need to just keep watching. But what I was thinking about is that in the New Testament, the apostles, they believed that Jesus was going to return, and they did these really drastic, dramatic, extravagant things. I mean, they sold their possessions, right? Remember, they sold their land. Isn't that interesting that he thinks Israel is going to be gathered back to the land? The land is so important. But you know what I'm just thinking of this right now. I never thought of this before. The disciples did after Jesus ascended, they sold all their land. Why did they do that? Maybe they knew they didn't need it anymore. Maybe they knew that they had a heavenly country, and this physical land wasn't going to mean anything to them anymore. So if you're really going to be waiting for Christ in the way that the disciples did, you would need to sell everything you had. Remember, wasn't it Ananias and Sapphira? They sold their land, but they didn't give all the money to the disciples. Think about that. I always felt kind of bad for them. I'm like, well, they gave part of it. They didn't give all of it. I mean, who's doing that today? We're not doing that. We're not living the way that they did, waiting the way that they waited. Yeah, and then Paul talks about don't get married. If it'd be better not to get married. Why did he say that? Now, if you look at it from a futurist perspective, I don't know that you can make sense of it, but from a preterist perspective, he said it because the Lord's return was imminent, imminent meaning soon, in a few short years, and there was going to be a great havoc on the land of Israel. And the temple was going to be destroyed, Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, people were going to be sold into slavery. It was going to be an upheaval, so maybe don't get married right now. Maybe you should put it off for a few years. I don't think it applies to us today. And isn't that great news? I mean, it's great news for me because I'm married. So, all right. And at the end, he says, doom hangs over the world. I mean, it literally says that right there. Doom hangs over the world. But we need to wait, watch, and work. That's all we can do. And I wrote, you wait, watch, and work differently if there is a doom cloud over you, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, we just talked about how the disciples waited, watched, and worked differently because there was a doom cloud hanging over them. I mean, there was a giant apocalypse coming in their lifetime, just as Jesus had predicted. But when we push it off into our future, this is what the Jehovah's Witnesses do. And I had some friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're told that it's wrong to go to college. Don't go to college, don't get a degree, don't be a doctor. It's a waste of your time because this apocalypse is coming any day. It's right around the corner. And there was a time, I mean, just in recent history, where they told them, don't get married, don't have children. And they were doing that. They put off, I think it was 1988. Wait, maybe it was 1980. 1988 is that other book, dispensational book, but I think it was 1980 that, or maybe it was 1975. I don't know. You can look it up. They've had a lot of different ones. It was like 1925, 1914, 1918, 1925, and I think 1975, that the Jehovah's Witnesses predicted that the world was going to end, that the apocalypse was coming. And each time they would tell their followers, you can just give us all your money. Don't bother going to college. Don't bother getting married. And then the time would come and go. And all these people had given up so much. I mean, now it was too late. Many of them, they didn't have children because they had been told that the world was going to end and that it would be a horrible time, so don't have children. So they didn't. And now, once they realized that they had been lied to, it was too late and they could no longer have children. Or they had not married the person that they wanted to, and now it was too late. Or they didn't go to college and now they were too old. Not that you have to go to college. I'm not saying you have to go to college. I went to college and I dropped out, so what good did that do me? But it's just an example of how you actually live differently if you believe doom is hanging over your head. But we have been living under this dichotomy, at least when I was a dispensationalist. It was this weird thing. It was like the doom is hanging over your head, but just keep living like it isn't. I mean, don't go selling all your possessions. You should still save for retirement, but Jesus is coming back any second. Don't put off getting married or going to college or having children, but Jesus is coming back any minute. So I always felt, I'm telling you, I struggled with a lot of guilt because I wanted to, this is kind of funny. I wanted to get new kitchen countertops for a long time, and I felt so guilty about it because I thought, Jesus is coming back, and here I am thinking about my kitchen countertops. Oh, so anyway, okay. That was the end of that chapter. Chapter 3 is titled Modern Europe, Ancient Rome. So, Modern Europe, Ancient Rome. I don't really know where he's going with that one. I haven't read that chapter yet, so we'll see. But in case you don't know where I'm going with it, I think Jesus came back in judgment of Jerusalem and the Old Covenant system, in judgment of the scribes and the Pharisees and those people who had seen his miracles and had rejected him, just like the Israelites. Remember the Israelites in Egypt, and they had seen all the wonders and the miracles that God worked through Moses in Egypt. And then when it came time to enter the promised land, they refused to do it because they were scared. And you know what he said to them? He said, that's it. None of you who saw my miracles in Egypt can enter the promised land. And that's what happened. That's what happened in 70 AD. None of the people who saw the miracles of Jesus, who saw who he was and saw him crucified and resurrected, saw the blind and the lame healed, they saw it with their own eyes, but yet they still refused to enter into this new covenant. They wanted to remain bound to this old covenant system. Those people did not enter in his rest, and they faced a judgment, and they died, just like the people died in the wilderness and did not enter the promised land. So, okay. Oh, it's just so long. I don't know. I don't even like to talk that much, but I get going here. So, okay. Bye.